the Intermediate District 287 School Board. As always, we are going to start with the reading of our mission, and this evening, in honor of it being her last meeting as a school board member, Regina Neville is going to read our mission statement.
Thank you, Crystal. The mission of Intermediate District 287 is to be the premier provider of innovative specialized services to ensure that each member district can meet the unique learning needs of its students.
Thank you. And we'll have more time for recognition at the end of the meeting because we have a couple of big milestones to recognize this evening. But Regina, would you also get us started with introductions?
Yes, I'm Regina Neville, representing Edina Public Schools.
I'm Michelle Kuntz. Good evening, and I represent the Orono Public Schools.
Hello, I'm Sarah Johansson, and I represent Wayzata Public School.
And Casey, proudly representing St. Louis Park Public Schools.
Jackie Mosqueda Jones, representing Osseo Area Schools.
I'm Sam Robbinsville 281.
I am Heidi Marty, representing West Tonka Public Schools.
Francesca Pagan Umar, representing Eden Prairie Schools.
Ruthie Dallas, representing Brooklyn Center Community Schools.
Shannon Andreessen, representing Hopkins Public Schools.
And I am Crystal Brackey from Richfield Public Schools. We move on to approval of our agenda this evening. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ann Casey and a second by Heidi Marty. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the agenda is approved. The first item of business on the agenda is open forum for community comments. I don't believe we received any requests for time this evening. Is that correct, Juanine?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So up next is approval of the consent agenda, which contains routine business items that we pass as a slate. If there is an item that somebody would like removed for individual consideration, we could entertain that now. If not, we could entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Regina Neville and a second by Francesca Pagan Umar. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the consent agenda is approved. So we move to share the success and recognitions, which this evening begins with our traditional above and beyond, which this evening is about West Education Center.
It is. I had the pleasure of presenting the last award at WEC, actually the day after graduation, and it went to Dur Bang. Dur is an IT specialist at WEC, and she was nominated in the category of well-being. And each of the nominations, you may recall, are focused on parts of our strategic plan. She isn't able to be here tonight because of a family emergency, but I have the privilege of knowing her quite well just over the years. The nomination included the following. Dur is always kind, caring, and helpful when anyone needs help. She brings joy to the workplace and always goes out of her way to take care of others. She makes this a fun place to work and helps build a positive staff culture. She is such a hard worker and can be in so many places in just one day. Without her commitment to response and action, without her commitment to excellence, without her expertise and problem-solving skills, without her dedication to the students, without her, we would all perform at a lower level. She brings joy and positive energy every day. She is a leader behind the scenes at both HTC and WEC. Her responsiveness and commitment to customer service are unmatched. So we're pleased that we were able to give her the award, and I just think it was the perfect person to end the school year with, and I was happy I was able to give it to her. So
Thank you. And congratulations to Dur. We are so grateful for the work that you do.
yeah.
Another good source of celebration on the agenda.
Yes, especially given tonight, you will hear in just a little bit about the proposed budget. this year, as well as several other years in the past, MDE has awarded the school finance award for 2022 to District 287's finance department. We knew that they are highly capable and very credible and have earned a lot of trust internally and externally. But getting this award really does signify the kind of respect publicly that our finance department deserves. So congratulations to both May and Gloria and everybody else that's involved in the finance department. As I walked in, I saw Dave Anderson's lights on a summer night. And it always signals that the audit is probably about to start right after we get the budget done. So they don't have many breaks in between the big parts of finance work, but congratulations. You deserve a round.
Super impressive, and your reward is spending Thursday night with us presenting the budget. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Next on the agenda is the superintendent report and specifically a legislative update.
Yes, I just wanted to do a brief summary. You read the newspapers as well as I do and know that the special session unfortunately did not yield an agreement, and it does look pretty grim for the future as well. I keep holding out that there will be some breakthrough somewhere along the line that gets everyone back into the Capitol for some kind of agreement. But unfortunately for us, that was a very significant event. I think I said this right about the time, but I want to repeat it. I am grateful to both the governor and the commissioner and Jim Dabney for their work in continuing to make our mental health funding a part of the final negotiations. And they held firm to the fact that the intermediates needed more money for mental health funding, along with other parts, obviously, of the House bill. And even in the final moments, the last Saturday, the Senate even did put an offer on the table as much lower amount, and the House did not agree to it. So there was obviously no agreement on that and many other things. So we are continuing to hope for something, but I think the important thing I wanted you to know is this year, maybe more than any other year, I think our advocacy really reached a much higher level than it ever has before. We had a lot of help, and you'll hear about that perhaps in a little bit. But we also know, unfortunately, the shooting brought a lot of sorry about that. The shooting brought a lot of attention to District 287. And I think it's important to know that attention continues to be there. In fact, this past couple of weeks, I've been in meetings with Erin Bailey. Erin is the executive director of the governor's children's cabinet. We had a chance to make our case to her and several members of the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education. It was the first time in my experience that I thought some key leaders in both those departments really understood the responsibility we have for some of the young people who walk through our doors. She called me after the meeting and she proposed that she bring 4 of the state commissioners out to visit. I encouraged her to make that in September, not in the summer when we have, fewer kids, but she is proposing and has started to organize Commissioner of Education, Commissioner of Human Services, Commissioner of Public Safety, and the Commissioner of Corrections. And she hopes to bring all 4 of them out to visit a building and again, hear more information about some of the challenges that we have faced and why the systems need, not only is the funding important, but the systems need to be aligned and working together. In my mind, it was a key set of conversations, and I've updated Marcy on this. And we're still in communication right now with Aaron Bailey, who I think will really work hard to make this happen. So I just want the board to be aware of that. The other thing that is happening is at the federal level. As many of you know, the shooting in Texas has brought a lot of negotiation between the House and the Senate on gun control, and the bill passed out of the Senate recently includes a lot of funding apparently for mental health and school safety. Unfortunately, it appears that it's at this stage written the same way the ESSER funding was, which, as you know, did not treat us very well. So I reached out to Congressman Phillips' office, who responded immediately, and they are writing a letter to try to influence some change in that. I also contacted Senator Smith's building. Both their education aides know us well at this point, and Senator Smith's office is also investigating and trying to influence. So I think the message I'm trying to convey is we have people beyond us, I think, who are now advocating, and hopefully some good will come of it. So I just wanted to share that with the board. So
Thank you.
A update that is full of both real disappointment and challenges, but also some potential and opportunity.
Yeah.
Just hearing the update, one, I appreciate you taking the time to update us. Two, I think it's always very exciting to hear about potential funding for such essential things like the mental health of the next generation of this society that right now doesn't have a place where they can consistently go and consistently be cared for. And those are the students we have. We literally have the students that even our emergency rooms, sometimes just there's no real place for them. And so this is so essential. What's heartbreaking is that one, it took the death of children for those in office to decide that they felt they wanted to be benevolent enough with the money that our citizens pay them in taxes to help out our next generation. And two, that it's now going to go through this convoluted process before it can get to the intermediate districts, who are the ones that overwhelmingly serve this most needing population. But I am grateful for it, and I hope that it does prove to be helpful. But I think that we have still a long way to go before we get to where we need to protect our next generation, make it more successful, give them what they need.
thank you. And the only thing I would add is, we're talking about huge bureaucracies of complex kinds of intersections. When you think about public education and the Department of Human Services, and they barely can understand each of their own parts of the system. And then when you try to start crossing systems, it's filled with complexity. So I'm pleased I'm not pleased that the session ended the way it ended, but I am pleased that the awareness is higher than it was before.
Shanna, did you have your hand?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to say thank you for saying that, Director Paganomar. I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiments, and I wanted to make a request that when that visit does happen, if you could alert the board and if maybe some of us could be present, I think it would be very informative. I'm thinking about Hopkins LAC invites lawmakers to our school buildings so they can see what they could be funding if they chose to. And I think it would be great to be a part of that so that we can make sure that we're on the same page, advocating for the same things that they hear when they're visiting District 287.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and I'm sure Marcy, we'll probably have another conversation about it, certainly as it gets scheduled. And I'm sure Marcy will, make sure that request is honored. I think it makes a lot of sense, certainly, to have board members there as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Michelle?
Well, just briefly, I just remember going to a meeting, and the commissioner of of Education and the Commissioner of, what do they call that? The safe, Commissioner of, I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm sorry about that. And it seemed they were always being pitted against each other. And it's great to hear that 4 of the commissioners are agreeing to meet. It's been a long time coming. So thank you, Sandy, for your continued advocacy. And we'll keep you posted.
Well, it certainly, I think, is something that all of you know is when we can get people out and understand our stories, that seems to be a breakthrough for many people. And I hope this is also one of those breakthroughs. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So we move next to Business Services and Labor Relations Report, which this evening starts with the presentation and request to approve the 2022-2023 original budget from May Hawkins, our Executive Director of Business Services, and Gloria Wilder, our Director of Finance. Just a reminder, this was previewed for us a few meetings ago, and we are required by the Department of Education to approve the next school year's budget by June 30th of each year. Hey, take us away.
To avoid a shutdown.
Kind of
All
an
right, we were
important
just
thing.
talking about legislature and not
Yeah.
doing jobs, so, you know.
We
All right.
appreciate the editorial
Good
comment.
evening, school board chair, board members and district administrators. It is my pleasure to co-present with Gloria Wilder, our Director of Finance, the original budget for the 22-23 school year for your consideration this evening. Oh, hang on, I have the clicker. All right, we have our learning intentions. So we have 4 learning intentions tonight. They are that we're going to learn a little bit about strategic priorities-based budgeting, a few highlights on our budget assumptions. We're going to talk about the actual budget report and then some comparison to prior years. Oops. Okay, it worked only for one click. Oh, now, oh, it just needed to catch up. Now let's see what I've done. We get to preview the whole thing. All right, here we go. All right. A budget is about more than numbers on a report. It is primarily how an organization is going to invest those amounts represented on that report to achieve its desired goals. At District 287, our desired goals are outlined in our strategic priorities. Those strategic priorities are student outcomes, evidence-based instruction, racial equity, trauma-sensitive and healing-centered practices, and employee well-being. Under our improved student outcomes through evidence-based instruction, we have our school improvement plans, our universal assessment guidelines for math and literacy, our key performance indicators, including our data dashboards, our professional development on using data for decision-making, instructional coaches, culturally responsive instruction, and 90 minutes of literacy instruction per day. Our student outcome goal relates to literacy, and our goal is to reduce racial disparities in reading growth by increasing the percent of students who reach their reading goal by 5% for all students and 8% for BIPOC students. There are 3 strategies that will be implemented to achieve that goal. They are follow assessment protocols, use adopted literacy curriculum with fidelity, and implement culturally responsive teaching and learning practices in each classroom. Oh, I just need to wait for it. Okay. Under our trauma-sensitive and healing-centered practices, we have our trauma-sensitive schools with our neurosequential model, our therapeutic teaching model classrooms, our school safety coach model, our mental health support staff, our professional development in trauma, crisis, and de-escalation, our positive behavior intervention strategies, and our social emotional learning. He's not my friend. There we go. Our goal under our trauma sensitive healing centered is to decrease the number of critical incidents, 10% for all students and 12% for students of color. And then the writing is too small for me to read from up there, so hang on one second. Our strategies under that goal are to develop staff knowledge of mental health, how to respond to mental health concerns, and develop strategies to increase access to education, to train all staff on critical incidents, crisis prevention strategies, and incident response, and to implement opportunities for staff to learn and engage in meaningful employee wellness activities across the spectrum of well-being. Racial equity and employee well-being, as you've just heard, are interwoven into the strategies that we've already discussed. These are additional items that those two areas will be talking or working on this upcoming school year. So in our racial equity, we have our identifying the district's role in perpetuating systemic inequities and our focus on eliminating those systemic inequities, our hiring and retaining diverse and racially conscious staff, and our being a place of belonging and safety. Some of the work that will be done in racial equity this year is supporting the racial equity action leadership team, our site-based equity teams, our book and workbook study groups. We're going to continue to build and sustain an anti-racist school climate and environment. We're going to increase staff knowledge on how microaggressions and systemic racism impact student outcomes. We're going to increase understanding of racial trauma and how that impacts student success. And we're going to further develop leadership understanding and use of 287's racial equity tools. Under our student and staff well-being, included in this budget are camera replacements at North Education Center, implementation of metal detectors, our employee well-being program, our employee recruitment and retention programs, and our infectious disease layers of protection. Some highlights of this original budget, and I'm going to read from my notes now. So some highlights are one of the biggest components for the next year's budget is the continuation of our tier system. Changing to the tier system started in the spring of 2019 as district leaders did a deep dive into systemic racial inequities and an area that raised concern and that we had the ability to influence change in was the special education allocation ratios for different disabilities. Through months of work with both member district special education directors and member district business managers, a new model called the tiers system was developed. The tiers system for staffing allocations is based on student need levels, not on disabilities. This changed every special education budget in the district and also changed the tuition billing classifications starting in the 2021 school year. Allocations based on student enrollment in each tier are sent to school sites where the building leadership teams, which include classroom staff, make budget decisions. Another highlight in this next year's budget is that we will be continuing our therapeutic teaching model at all of our sites. We'll also continue our Nexus team. Our Nexus team offers consultation, training, and support to member districts and staff prior to a student being referred to District 287, and then also assists when member district students are returned to their home district and transitioning back, including providing trauma-informed training for member districts staff. In addition to the continuing items, we have some new items. So one of the new items that we did this year, we piloted this year, is our BRIA. So when we talk about racial equity tools, our BRIA is the newest member to our tool. That's our budget request reduction equity assessment. This was piloted with our non-staff budget allocations. And I have a little blurb here too. The assessment asks the person, department, or school making the request to analyze racial demographics and make equity-based decisions. The goal is to help reduce disparities and promote allocation of resources based on data. This new tool was piloted by the schools in their budget decisions related to allocating their non-staff budgets. Feedback from the sites was that it allowed for a pause and question time. And then also, as we already talked about, the safety team recommendations for metal detectors and camera upgrades at NEC are new in this budget year. Now we'll talk a little bit about budget assumptions. On March 10th, the board approved the revenue and expenditure budget assumptions for the 22-23 school year. All of the adopted budget assumptions are incorporated into the development of this budget. This next slide, is just a highlight of some of the revenue ones, right? So all funds available per current statute, which is the increase in the general ed formula of 2%, are included in the budget. All known federal COVID grants are included. Revenues are based on projected ADMs from member districts or historical trend, depending on the program. And our COVID assumption of in-person classes will continue throughout the school year, right? So our revenue is based on having all of our students in our schools. As our revenue, and the main component of revenue is our ADMs. I have included 3 slides in here related to our ADMs. The blue lines are the planned ADMs for each year. The red lines are the actual ADMs for each year. Except for 2021, that's the May ADM amount that you just approved in the monthly report in your consent agenda. So if we look, this is for special ed. So this is our special education programs. In May, they had 439 ADMs. The projection and the revenue in this budget is based on 455 ADMs, or a slight growth for next year. This next slide includes our Northern Star Online on the top. In May, they had 803 ADMs. Their projection for next year is 900 ADMs, so they're projecting growth for next year. The bottom graph is our alternative learning center programs. They were at 227 ADMs in May, and their revenue for next year is based on 223 ADMs. And then our last 2 programs are on this slide, our it's care and treatment programs on the top. Our care and treatment programs, I think I made that one too small, so I can't read it. Are projecting a 10 ADM increase over their May ADMs of 113 for 123. And our career and technical had 77.66 ADMs in May, and they're projecting a flat enrollment of 77 for next year. I'm not going to try and read that. Problem with being an accountant for many, many years is that you lose your distance vision. So I have a copy, right? So one of the other components that's included in here is our federal COVID grants, right? So this is just a list of the grants that are included in the 22-23 budget. The first column gives to the names of the grant. The second column is the award amount. That isn't necessarily the amount that's included in the 22-23 budget, because these awards go over multiple years. Okay, so first of all, we have our ESSER 2 summer and our summer Fin 163 and our governor's budget. So our ESSER 2 summer was $446,572 was our award. We spent probably about 2/3 of that last summer, so 1/3 of it is still in play for this school year. We then did apply for an additional grant for summer school for this upcoming year, and were awarded $666,617. That has to be spent this year. And then the governor's budget is related to community engagement and mental health, and that is $63,695. And again, those can only be spent in summer. And all of the funds in that first line expire at the end of this summer. The next line down is our ESSER 3. 100% of District 287's ESSER 3 allocation is restricted to learning recovery. So we were awarded $651,638. We have those funds for the next 2 school years. The plan is to invest those funds in 1 mental health clinician that would be paid for each year, into school field trips and hands-on learning experiences, recovery programming for students, life skills curriculum and instructional planning, and an additional hours to further develop our family engagement model. In addition to those funds that we receive directly, we also have funds that we receive for our ALC students through our fiscal host districts. So just like the governor's funds up above, we are receiving $28,603 through our fiscal host districts for our ALC students. That will be spent on community events and field trips for ALC programs and must be spent this summer. And then we'll be receiving $518,184 ESSER 3 flow-through funds for our ALC students. 103,637 of that is restricted to learning recovery, right? So it has to be spent in extended time or summer school. The rest of the funds will be divided evenly over the 2 years that funding is available for, and they're being allocated to each of the ALCs based upon the fiscal host district amount. Okay, that was a lot of information. Are there any questions on the federal COVID grants before I move forward? So then the next slide here is about our expenditure assumptions, right? So we already talked about the tiers budgeting ratio system. Staffing costs will be budgeted at estimated amounts for any contracts that are not settled. Expenditure budgets were reduced to the extent possible to align with revenue projections. And then reductions will not impact the district's ability to comply with federal and state legal mandates. So once again, these are just highlights of the expenditure assumptions that the board approved in March. With that, I will hand it over to our Director of Finance, Gloria Wilder, who will walk you through our budget report and then some comparisons.
Good evening. Now for the really exciting part, I get to go over all the numbers with you tonight. So our first page in this presentation is your budget summary report, and you have a copy in your board packet. I wanted to highlight a few things on this budget summary worksheet. The first column in blue is your projected beginning fund balance as of 7/1/22. That is the projected fund balance that we brought to you with the FY22 revised budget. So when we finish FY22 and bring the audit numbers to you, then we'll have the final number, and that will become the number starting in the revised FY23 budget. The next two columns are our projected revenues and expenditures. And then taking the beginning fund balance, adding in your revenues, subtracting out your expenditures, we get the projected fund balance. And then the following column is any requested transfers. And then we have the adjusted fund balance projected. So at 287, we take the general fund unassigned and we divide it into 4 program areas: the district-wide admin and operations, the ALC academic education area, the career technical education area, and the special education area. You can see under each of those 4 areas, we have a line called grants. Last year, we decided to separate out the grants on this worksheet just because the grants can vary greatly from year to year. So we wanted you to be able to see the ongoing expense and revenue in the area without that variation of the grants included. You can see in the district-wide admin and operations area, we are projecting the expenditures to be above revenue and using that original fund balance to make that fund balance. The ALC and academic area, we are also projecting that the expenditures will exceed the revenue by that 402,000. We are requesting to move from the special ed unassigned area of that 402,000 to make that fund balance. The career and technical education area is projecting a balanced revenue and expenditures. You can see in the grant area of the career and technical education. I wanted to highlight this a little bit because in the next slides, we'll have comparisons. And in past, we have not had a very high figure there with the grants. But next year at FY23, we are taking on the fiscal host responsibility for the Perkins grant. So the majority of that revenue and expenditures you see there is not really 287 revenue and expenditures that'll flow through us to participating districts. And then we have the special education area. In that area, we are requesting to move out the 600 and I can't read that number from afar, 602,395. The 402 will go above to the ALC academic area. And then the 200,000, we're requesting to move down below into the assigned area for strategic priorities. So the next section of the budget worksheet is the assigned area. And this is an area that 287 chooses to track separately from the unassigned area. So we keep the revenues and expenditures and the fund balance separate so they can be used for those specific purposes. The next area on the budget worksheet is the restricted, general fund restricted area. And these are areas that are restricted by state statute. So we have to record revenues and expenditures separately, as well as keep a separate fund balance so that those fund balance dollars can only be used for those specific purposes. As you can see, we are spending down in quite a few of the restricted areas. And I wanted to highlight the compensatory area. We did take a reduction in revenue from prior year in that area of 329,535. And then the last area is your non-major funds. And so that's basically everything that's not general fund. And I don't know why they call it non-major. It makes them feel a little less significant, but they are very significant. So the first area is food service. And you'll see the revenues and expenditures appear to balance there. But within that revenue number is a requested transfer of 551,123. We record it in the revenue instead of the transfer column because we have to report that fund as a balance. So it can't be reported in deficit, but the revenue is offset by an expenditure to the district-wide admin and operations area. So that we'll talk about a little more in our presentation. And then we have also in that non-major funds area, our debt service fund, our scholarship or custodial funds, which we're really not anticipating more revenue there, just a little interest. But that's an area that every year we plan to spend down a little bit. And then we have our internal service funds for dental and health. And we are expecting, for the most part, for them to balance. We are projecting a little bit more expenditures in the dental area. So moving on, in total, for all of the areas together, our revenue is expected to increase by 4.1% over prior year revised revenue budget. And our expenditures are expected or projected to increase by 3.46% over the prior year revised budget. So the unrestricted or unassigned general fund is projected to be at 7.8%, which is within the board parameters of at least 6 to 8%. With the FY22 revised budget, we were projecting 8.1%. And final year for FY 21, we ended at 8.62%. So we've been hovering around that 8%. This slide came from our FY 21 audit report, management report. And we threw it in here because we just wanted to highlight the importance of a fund balance. You can see the top blue line is our unassigned fund balance, and you can see that's relatively flat throughout the years. But the green, lime green line is our cash position and investments. And you can see how that can vary from year to year. So we want to keep a certain amount of fund balance so we can avoid borrowing just to keep our cash flow going. Okay, on the general fund. So taking all the general fund areas together, we wanted to show the reduction. So we took our FY 22 revised budget and added a 3% inflationary increase. We know it's at least that for our contract settlements and inflation. And then compare that to our projected FY 23 budget. We are projecting a decrease from that inflationary factor of 1.3% or 1,139,297. So dividing that down a little bit more. Now this area, I'm going to go over the unassigned areas. So this is net of the grants. So we factored out the grants so that you could have a comparison of what the ongoing costs were. So we took for admin and operations, we took the original budget, again, using the same formula of the 3% inflationary factor. We took a projected decrease of 864,979, which equals 6.4% of the prior year budget. So that was achieved through reductions in staff and non-staff cuts. So applying that same formula to the ALC and academic area, we project a decrease of 230,702 or 2.3%. And again, this is due to staff and non-staff budget reductions in the ALC programs and the use of ESSER grant funds. In the special ed area, remember when May presented that graph of the enrollment, we are projecting a little increase in the enrollment, but applying that inflationary factor, they were really able to keep a flat budget at projecting just a little over a 0.06% increase. So I wanted to go back and highlight again those transfers that we talked about on the budget summary worksheet. Again, from the special ed area, the unassigned area, we're moving into the ALC academic area, 402,395. And then we're also requesting another 200,000 to go to that assigned area of strategic priorities. And that strategic priorities area we use to fund our therapeutic teaching model at North Education Center and South Education Center, as well as other strategic priorities. The transfer between funds, between food service, Fund 2, and admin and operations in the general fund, again, was 551,123 recorded in revenue, and the expenditures are recorded in the admin and operations area. This is increase about 10% from the FY 22 budget. We are expecting the revenue to go down a little bit. The COVID waivers are expiring. We know also that the food costs are increasing. So we are doing the best to keep that as low as possible. Food service made some reductions in the current year that will continue on to FY '23. And we do typically bring a transfer in the food service area just because we are running smaller schools. So we don't have that economies of scale that you see in larger programs. So a few more of the budget notes to highlight. Again, the strategic priorities that we use for the therapeutic teaching model. The COVID expense was assigned fund balance area, and we used a portion of that in FY '22. It was funds we set up aside specifically for pandemic-related expenses, and we're using that to fund expenses that are not covered by our federal grants. We have another assigned area called tuition adjustment reserve. We did use some of that fund balance in FY '21, and we used that fund balance to offset any potential loss in revenue-based programs for tuition-based programs or MDE tuition programs. And then on the non-major fund, the debt service fund is scheduled to continue to grow. We have a sinking fund established for the North Education School quality school construction borrowing, and that's due in 2029. So that fund will continue to increase until we have to pay out that debt in 2029. Okay, so now I'm going to look at a couple of graphs and comparisons to prior year. The first one is a pie chart of our revenues. And you can see our biggest portion of revenues comes from state sources. And these state sources include our special education MDE tuition. It includes Northern Star Online Supplemental Aid, and then it includes compensatory as well as other state flow-through grants. The next piece of the puzzle I wanted to kind of highlight is that blue, darker blue invoice services. This is probably more unique to an intermediate district. We have a lot of billing. I can tell you a lot of billing we do in the finance area to get that $18 million because there is certain revenue that doesn't flow through to us that will flow through to an independent district. And then we have the levy area, and that is areas that our member districts, all of you levy on our behalf. Again, it doesn't flow directly to us, so then we invoice for that. And then the next largest piece is the federal grants that come through, and we get some federal funding for food service. So those federal sources, and then we have a small amount of miscellaneous, which is, you know, miscellaneous grants, donations, fees, that type of thing. So comparing that to prior year, you can see the pie chart does not change a lot, and we have very minimal change in the percentages. They're always very similar from year to year. So then taking the expenditure budget and dividing it into a pie chart, we take the instructional areas and operational areas, as well as the non-major funds. It does exclude construction, internal service fund, and trust. So these are what is considered our governmental funds. So we pulled that into a chart, and you can see our biggest area is special education. Now this, if you compare it to the budget summary, this includes all of the areas. So assigned, restricted areas are all combined on this pie chart. So the figures will look a little different from the summary report. But again, when you compare it to prior year, you can see it stays very similar. The biggest difference on this pie chart is from prior year is probably the career technical area. And that's why I wanted to highlight it in the budget summary, because in the career technical area, remember, we're taking on that fiscal host in FY23. So it looks like it's bigger expenditures, but it's really not, because it's a flow through type thing. So now we're pulling in on these graphs. The next 4 slides will be graphs, and I won't spend a lot of time on these. But important thing to note on these graphs, they are represented in thousands. So if you would add 3 zeros behind every figure you see on the next 4 graphs, that's the actual dollar amount. We divided it by 1,000 so that the numbers wouldn't get really teeny on the graph so you could see them. So we compare the current year, well, this budget that we're bringing for FY23 against the budget from FY22, because FY22 has not been finalized yet. And then we have actuals from FY21 and budget from FY21, as well as actuals from FY20 and budget from FY20. You can see on this graph, the district-wide admin and operations is showing a decrease in FY23 compared to FY22. The ALC academic area is showing increase, and that's primarily because of the growth projected in the NSO program. Career and tech is also showing that increase, primarily because of the Perkins host situation. And the special ed area is increasing the increase, projecting a little bit of an increase due to the small increase in enrollment projected over actual, current year actual. The restricted area is projecting a slight decrease in FY23 as compared to FY22 budget. And the non-major areas includes a little bit of an increase there. So the next slide compares the total general fund again. And overall, the general fund is showing a 3% increase in revenues over prior year. And the total for all funds is showing a 4.1% increase over prior year. Expenditures, we have the same graph with the multiple years. And the expenditures really follow the same trend as the revenue. So the admin and operations is showing a decrease against prior year. And we had talked about reductions made there. Career tech and academic area showing an increase, as well as the special ed area. The restricted area is also projecting a decrease from prior year. And then my last graph is the expenditures. We did factor out the construction fund in this expenditure. So the reason we did that is there's no construction in FY23 or 22, but in prior years in the all funds, it skewed things a little bit because we had higher expenditures due to the construction at ABAC. But in the general fund, we're projecting a total increase of 1.71% in expenditures over prior year. And then within all funds, projecting a 3.45% increase over prior year. So lastly, I just want to give a big thanks to everyone involved in the budget process. The one thing I like about 287, we have a very collaborative approach to our budget. So definitely want to thank Elizabeth Lodge Rogers for her leadership and the principal involvement, the administrative assistant, the school improvement teams, the district-wide and operational leaders, especially Radius Guest for her leadership in helping us develop that racial equity assessment tool we piloted this year, and as well as the whole finance team. So with that, Is there any questions on the information presented by May or myself?
So much to both of you. This is so much work. So many hours. It's hard to even like estimate how much brain has gone into what you just presented us. So thank you. Questions or comments? Thank you, Anne, for this way. Shanna, go ahead.
Thank you. I also appreciate this presentation. It was understandable and informative, which is not easy to do with budgets. I am wondering about the transfer that you talked about from, I believe my understanding is from food service into admin.
It's actually the reverse. So the money comes from the district-wide admin and operations. So it's an expenditure in Fund 1. And then it's a revenue that goes into Fund 2.
Okay. So it's coming from our unassigned
Yes, our
and going
unassigned.
into food service due
Yep.
to all the things that you stated that we don't know how school meals are going to be funded next year. And it's very difficult for funding to happen in schools that don't have economies of scale.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm glad you explained that to me because I was like, this doesn't make sense. We're taking money out. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Part of your presentation is that you said there'd be a reduction in compensatory funds, which in fact has been tied to the free and reduced lunch forms, which now are calling the educational benefits forms. Is that part of our issue, or we don't have the forms, we have people for the forms, or I mean,
Yeah.
we have to do the forms.
I don't know, do you want to speak to this one? Okay. All right. So it's a combination of many things. A, our enrollment's down, right? B, everybody was entitled to free meals without filling out a form,
Right.
right? We do have a hard time getting forms back from our families, but our social workers and folks, we did a big campaign. We did another big campaign when the PEBT came out for families, right? Saying, you know, please get your paperwork in so you can get your benefit, right? And so that helped. But it's still the big chunk of it. I would think the biggest component of it relates to the fact that our enrollment is down.
We have to use the forms that we have now for next year's.
Correct. So the forms that we got during FY '22, right?
So when you're getting.
On
free
next
meals, it's
year's.
hard to be motivated to fill out.
Correct. But
I would say. for me.
you know, ours was, our form return was slightly below what I had seen in other years. So that's why I'm saying the biggest component of that is that our enrollment is below what it was 2 years ago.
Carry periods. The closure of some of our.
Oh, true. So
program was a big factor.
Elizabeth is just reminding me that, you know, some of our care and treatment programs closed as well, right? And so that the 100% of residential care and treatment students are eligible for free and reduced, right? So that reduced our numbers that were eligible for that as well. Thank you for that reminder.
Forgot my next question.
Could I
We'll come back when you're ready.
have a quick follow-up on that very issue? There was legislation proposed during this session to break compensatory funding from parents having or students having to complete a form to get money that's actually due to them. And so I think it's important that we continue to advocate for that. This model of making families complete paperwork over and over again, actually, you're supposed to redo it every time your income changes, is burdensome and not an accurate measure of real need in our communities. And so there are lots of different models that the legislature could pick and choose from that would more accurately measure and provide necessary funding to communities that need it. So hopefully some work will get done next year around this issue.
That reminded me of what I was going to say. I was thinking those forms are such a barrier for a lot of things. So I appreciate you, because I know that's something you've been looking into quite a bit. Please reach out to us when it's time to advocate for that again at the.
Absolutely.
I would appreciate that. Which reminded me of the BREA process that you've started. I just want to say thank you. Or any questions on it or anything, but I'm always delighted by the amount of work that goes in this district on making sure that we're equitable in every single decision. And so I appreciate your presentation of having such qualitative context to the budget and the equity focus of the budget.
I had thank you for putting this all together, very time consuming. Thank you for taking the time to present it. And I just wanted to know, there is a slight projected increase in dental costs. And I was curious, is that because we're expecting the number of procedures people seek after the pandemic to increase, or is that because the cost for the insurance itself is increasing?
So we are self-insured, right? So, so that's basically a claims cost. We have not increased our dental premiums in well over a decade. Since I got here, right? So that'd be a decade now. So our expenditures are now exceeding our revenues. So, right, so our insurance committee will need to probably look in the future about possibly increasing our dental premiums.
The
So,
cost for the procedures is going up, or because people are seeking more?
well, we did exceed last year, or we're projecting to exceed it this year as well, exceed our revenues, but we do have more than a year's worth of claims in fund balance, right? So as the insurance committee looked at that, they went, well, now might not be the best time, right? So we'll use some of our reserve, right? And then we'll look next year and do a deeper dive. Yeah.
Just echoing a lot of what has been said, but the order in which you made this presentation is so impressive. And I've had such respect for the finances of this organization since I started, and that only grows every time I see a detailed report like this one. So thank you both. But the way that our equity discussion, our trauma-informed practice, everything that we do as a district is aligned and fluid throughout our departments. We're not siloed, and that continues to improve. So it's kudos to everyone involved in making that happen. But to begin a budget presentation the way you chose to begin it, and that was intentional, it makes it all fall into place. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Well, if we're not putting our resources toward our strategic priorities, are we actually working toward our strategic priorities, right? So if that's not what our budget's about, then maybe we need to start up. It is what our budget's.
That was such a good note to end it on.
It was. I have a question though.
Oh.
It's tied to this, and it's tied to actually one of the things that Jackie shared too. So I have already forgot what BREA stands for.
The Budget Request Reduction Equity Assessment.
Okay, so my question is how that interfaces with our existing racial equity impact analysis tool. Was that still overseeing the whole process, or did the new tool replace that in this process?
So the tools can be used kind of together,
Okay.
right? The new tool has a lot of the same similar questions, but asks you to look at data as well,
Okay.
right? So what are the demographics of your students in the tier 2? What are your demographics of your students in tier 3? How have you allocated your resources then to tier 2 and tier 3 based on what are the needs of those students, right? And are we meeting needs of students as we're allocating these resources, or are we just saying the same amount to every kid, right? And so it's part of that kind of decision making. So it's specific to budget decision making and allocation of resource decision making. Whereas the other tool, right, is a much broader tool that can be used in any conversation.
Thank you. That additional level of detail was helpful. Sandy, I think you want to say more and then we'll go to you, Sue.
Yeah, I was just going to add to it, actually was a development subsequent to this budget conversation a year ago. And recognizing that the board really was trying to play their role in asking about the analysis tool, but it's such a big thing to ask about. We probably weren't as adequately able to answer your questions. And so when Radius brought the concept of making one specific to the budget, it resonated. And thank you, Radius and Gloria and May, for hours and hours and hours of working through the technicalities of making that a functional tool. So our hope was in explaining that to the board, you would see that the work had been done from an equity standpoint during the budget buildup. So hopefully you'll find that helpful.
Very much. Thank you.
My questions regarding the budget assumptions. What was the biggest assumption made as regards to our loss of enrollment?
So our loss of enrollment for the upcoming year,
Yes.
because not every program is losing enrollment, projected to lose enrollment for the upcoming
But
year.
overall, we are, that's why we have to make budget cuts, right?
Yeah, I mean, overall, we are down enrollment from last year's projections. That's why we had to make budget cuts, right? So our last year projections on those graphs are much higher than our projections for the upcoming school year. So our revenues, even for this year, are not going to meet where we thought they were in our original budget, right? And so when we brought you the revised budget, we reduced our revenues, right? And we're using fund balance to make this year work. Well, we don't have any fund balance left to make next year work, so we had to make reductions.
Right, so that's what I'm asking, where are you seeing the biggest losses, or what's being assumed are the biggest drops in enrollment in certain programs or overall?
So we saw, I can go back to the graphs, but special education, right? At one point, we had over 500 students, and we're projecting 455 for next year, right? Our ALC programs are down as well, right? So we have 2 ALC programs that are between 40 and 50 kids. So I mean, at some point in the future, we might have to discuss what's the minimum size we can maintain.
I remember earlier when this came up and you were presenting to us at a board, one of the things we were being told is that there were decisions made at some of the districts we serve, that some of the tier 4 students that they would have sent to us, they're now deciding to try to meet the needs of in their own district. So I think that's some of the transition.
And that is some of the
And so that was
transition
in
as well.
Osseo, right? It was the Osseo School District that was making, one of the districts that was making that decision.
Yeah, and so the special ed revenue used to have a cap, right? And the cap came off, right? And when that cap was in place, if you started a new program, you had to fund it all yourself. There was no new special ed revenue for you. Now the special ed cap is gone, right? And so member districts started then doing some of the programs that they could, right? If they have a critical mass, right? We've talked a lot here about meeting students' needs in your districts wherever we can.
I think it's, I'm sorry. I think it's important at the same time to recognize when that happens that the districts that you might have mentioned are still sending students to us. So, you know, they're sending kids who are probably higher need than setting 4 kids in general. So it's important to kind of put that alongside of the actual starting of programs because it impacts us in different ways. The numbers, it impacts us in terms of increased needs of students that may need a higher number of services to meet those needs.
Any addition? Yes, Shannon, go
I
ahead.
just Had one more thing. I really appreciate that on this summary that you have pulled out the grant revenue so that we can see, because grants are a special type of funding and it's not just that it's not guaranteed. It requires a lot of work, both in getting a grant and administering it and reporting back on it. So I think that I just think it's really important for us to take that message to anyone that will listen about how much of our education is grant-based. It's alarming, actually, and how much work that puts on layers on top of the work that school districts are already doing.
Like for grants this past year, those grant dollars, so it is administration and program planning.
Yes.
So if you didn't hear, Gloria, we're currently for FY 22, we have 64 grants. Right, so yeah, so that's a lot of work on a lot of individuals' parts.
And in general, they're short duration, right? So there's always this turnover, like 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then they have to be applied for again,
Right.
or
Right.
you have to find other funding, or it's a lot of work and instability.
I think it's a symbol of how our education system is not functioning to actually provide what is needed
Absolutely.
for our students and for our staff.
Yeah.
And that being said, we are grateful for the good work that happens here to get those grants because we know that our students and our staff need and deserve them. Okay, I'm looking to see if there are any additional comments or questions. I don't see any, so we could entertain a motion to approve the 2022-23 original budget as presented.
So moved.
We have a motion by Sam Sant and a second by Ruthie Dallas. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the budget is approved. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
And May, you get to just stay up there at the podium to talk about liability and workers' compensation insurance as carriers and premiums. And we welcome our special guest to this
And I
section of
will
the agenda.
introduce him in just a second here. So the reason this is an action item and not a consent agenda item is that there are several changes to carriers. And we also wanted to share a short report with you. So the district hired USI as our insurance broker in March of 2021. And over the last year, they've worked with various departments across the district to implement changes to reduce the district's liability exposure. And Mohammed El Sawaf, I just messed up.
Oh, you said it great.
I did not. We'll share a short summary of that work and its impact on the district's insurance marketability and the premiums for the upcoming school year. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here with you. Thank you. So I'm a consultant. I work in risk management and insurance. I've been in the insurance industry now for a little bit over 15 years and take a lot of pride in working with school districts across the state. I've been an advisory board member over at Children's Defense Fund for a number of years, so familiar with the advocacy work, both at the intermediate level as well as across the state. I'm a big advocate for hiring the right people to do great work and resulting in good outcomes. And I think this year is an exemplary notion of that. Regina, you hit on some really great points earlier in the fact that there's a lot of cohesion amongst 287. So actually it made my job a lot easier to work through the various departments and kind of learn about how 287 thinks about risk management and insurance. Insurance we think about as a fallback to the end result of if something catastrophic were to happen. But there are a lot of controllables that can be found. And we went through a discovery process through the IT department, through the general counsel, through executive services, a number of different areas, workers' compensation, the HR department, and discovered that you were already doing really good work. It was a matter of just really executing the marketing effort of that and implementing a targeted risk management plan, which you'll find in the packet. So I just wanted to highlight that and also say that we exerted a pretty aggressive marketing effort this year based on the results of the work that was conducted throughout the year. And the end result was to put a motion really to move to carrier Liberty Mutual in lieu of Hanover. So we were deliberate about the process. We were succinct with the people that were involved in it. And I thought that the results were really exceptional. We saved over $100,000 in comparison to what would have been presented from the incumbent carrier. We got improved terms and conditions. There was a transition from moving to a $100,000 retainer or deductible on your educator's legal liability. We actually got that down to $5,000 this year. The expiring term was 50,000. So that's just one example of an area where we improved terms and saved money. And we're headed in the right direction. You spend a lot of money on workers' compensation, but we are trending in the right direction in that. So our hope is to be under $1 million next year and headed towards a below 2.0 experience mod. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, give the floor back.
Mohammed, thank you for being here on your Thursday night. Questions or comments? Something that you want to share?
I have a comment, but not about what Mohammed just mentioned. I just want to publicly thank Mohammed. Besides his expertise in risk management, in learning about the district, he came to realize that we did have a lot of challenges, critical incidents, and trying to advocate for our district. And that interest and his expansive set of connections, frankly, to policymakers became something that he and I talked about. And in all honesty, you probably know that there have been times when I've tried to get attention and I couldn't get attention from policymakers. And when I talked to Mohammed, it probably was the first time in a long time that I felt somebody genuinely wanted to help and knew how to help. And every time he wrote or I wrote or called, he was just so willing to stretch himself and his own personal connections to help the district that I just wanted to thank you for that. It meant a lot. That was before February 1st. And it boosted me, to be honest, at a time when I needed somebody to just help us make connections. And I won't forget that. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Hard to imagine hearing a better thing about Turner. My goodness.
Well, hearing that, I would say jazakumullah khair for your efforts, because clearly saving money, but also increasing the quality of the terms is not usually two things that you hear that go together. So sincerely, thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I agree. It's a challenging insurance market. So if you ever want to go to bed quickly, I can tell you a story or two. Save you the misery of that. What ecosystem?
I'm just curious, do we see savings too? Because part of, over the last few years that when the distance learning, so then there's probably obviously no claims, with students not being in class or with the staff. Do we see savings from that as well?
There was a little bit of a period where workers' compensation wasn't as influenced or tapped into due to the remote environment. But in general, when we think about all risks, buildings are still exposed to tornadoes and, fires and all kinds of things. And so there's a whole variety of risk that sort of kind of is contemplated into that. It was a short period, so I wouldn't say it had that much of an influence.
I just have one more. Speaking of the sleeping, a lot of the work you do helps us to sleep well at night. We have a lot of things that are happening, but it takes a village to care for our staff and for our students and for our facilities and all things. And so thank you for doing that with a strong business mind as well as a strong heart. We really appreciate it.
No, of course, it's absolutely my pleasure. Gives us life to do the work that we do, because insurance, I promise you, can be a pretty dry subject. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So with that, we could entertain a motion to approve the liability, crime, workers' compensation, and cyber risk insurances with the carriers named for each type of insurance at the premiums listed for the 2022-23 school year. I just read it out loud to try to make it easy.
So moved.
So we have a motion by Shannon Andreessen and a second by Francesca Pagan Umar. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the motion is approved. Thank you so much. We move into the board business section of the agenda. Just a couple items that I'll pull out specifically. The first is the superintendent evaluation summary. And as required by statute, I will read a summary of our closed session evaluation of the superintendent. If you would like to follow along instead of just hearing my voice for a few minutes, it is in the board packet. On Thursday, June 9th, 2022, the School Board of Intermediate 287 went into closed session pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05, Subdivision 3A, to evaluate the performance of the superintendent. Superintendent Lewandowski's annual performance evaluation was for the period of July 1, 2021 through June 9, 2022, and was based on board members' input to 7 overarching questions in order to provide feedback to Superintendent Lewandowski relative to her work performance on behalf of Intermediate 287. Comments from board members praised her enthusiastic leadership of staff, support of board members, as well as her tireless work in keeping member districts and the Minnesota legislature informed. Strategic planning is embedded and continues to drive decision-making. Each successive school year, new challenges present themselves and solutions need to be developed. With Sandy's leadership, these challenges are met and resolutions implemented. In the context of the district's mission, vision, and values, the importance of keeping all perspectives in mind is noted as we continue to move forward to fill any gaps in understanding the important work of Intermediate 287 and continuing to fulfill our mission. Additional comments concluded that expectations are being met and included the suggestion to continue bringing forward the celebrations and kudos for the great work that has been done. In conclusion, the school board continues to recognize and support the exemplary work of Superintendent Lewandowski on behalf of the students, parents, staff, and member districts of Intermediate 287. Thank you. There's just one other thing I wanted to call out before we go to the once around the table section of the board business agenda, which is that our next meeting is not until August 25th. So please note that in your calendar. And at the next meeting, we will have an item of business to appoint a new vice chair to the school board, since our current vice chair will be leaving us at the end of this meeting. So I just invite people to think about your interest and look for more information in early August if that is something that you would be interested in. So we move to once around the table, and tonight are going to focus a lot of our efforts on celebrating these two very special people on either side of me who are with us for their last formal meeting for Intermediate District 287. And as the longest tenured board member and the person who has worked with Sandy by far the longest, I asked Michelle Kuntz to say a few words about our retiring superintendent.
Well, Sandy, I've been working on it's agony, let me tell you, because I'm so conflicted. I cannot tell you how much you have enriched me personally. We've known each other since 2001, I think, when I came over, and you weren't the superintendent yet. So that happened. And and no sooner was Sandy superintendent, I think it was 3 years later, she won the Superintendent of the Year award from MASA. Is that correct, MASA? Yes. So we knew we had chosen wisely. Little did I suspect that we would continue in this work for so long. I think you're the longest tenured superintendent, but maybe I made that up.
Feels like a long time.
Some things that I've admired you for all this time, your openness, your compassion, your willingness to tackle any problem that somebody brings to you, and your kindness. You are such a kind person, not only to the students, not only to the board, to the staff, but I know that you are a good friend to many people, and that carries a lot of weight, I think. Also, Sandy has been fearless in bringing change to this organization. I walked in here that first day and there were 26 board members. 26. And they were all great people, and there was a lot of contention as to which of the two got to stay. So obviously I did. Otherwise, yeah. And we've had some fun times. I learned a lot about building a school building when we built SEC. It has a LEED certification that was very rare for schools to have. We had movable doors and windows. I mean, it was super modern. Some of that has changed now, but it was a great building. In fact, Sandy told me about a little boy, maybe 10 years old, who had come to the opening of SEC with his mother. And he just could not get over the fact that he was going to come to school and be in a super building. And did he say, for us? This is for us? And that, even now, it gives me chills because there was one building that he came from in St. Louis Park, very substandard. I mean, these poor little boys and girls, and they were special needs. And it just illustrates that over the years, we've improved so much. And we're not just taking a building and say, oh, this better do for you, none of that. And then Sandy, you've brought people to us that we never knew were out there willing to talk to us, teaching us how to work with students with needs. Like I'm thinking of Dr. Bruce Perry and his famous, you don't ask, what did you do? You ask, what happened to you? And I think we've been working in this business since then, many years now. So you've always led by example. And I think you've won over people no one else could have done like you did. You have a way of, I'm not going to, yeah, I will say it, twisting somebody's arm. And maybe you pry them with chocolate now and again. I don't know. But it's not an easy task to be beholden to 13 school districts, which are now 11. And that process, that was tough, letting go of 2 districts. But we managed, and Sandy had the wherewithal to bring all of us, including all the other school superintendents, together and teaching us by example, this is how you work with adversity. So, there's so much, Sandy, that I'm nearly at the end. Oh, yeah. Well, I thought I was inspired with it. Sandy, you've testified before sometimes ignorant audiences. You've shed tears, most recently, Channel 11. If you haven't seen Sandy's interview, it's what I'm talking about. This woman is so strong and passionate, and I want to be your friend forever. And I think you've helped people change their minds and hearts about students with special needs. And you take good care of your staff. That's so important. And I loved going on the visits to our buildings, get on the bus. That was brilliant. And I was so sad for 2 years that we couldn't do it. And so I wish you only the very best. I will miss you terribly when we come back, but we will welcome Marcy and have a new adventure together. And I hope to see all of you back in August. So thank you, Sandy.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for those very kind words and thank everyone around the board table. It certainly is an odd feeling to think that this is the last board meeting, but there's also a freeing part to retiring and just kind of feeling it freshly in the last couple of weeks. And I just have so many great memories of this district. It certainly was a career, but it also was a passion. And the job allowed me to work on something I was passionate about. Not everybody gets to do that. And so I'm very grateful and feel privileged for this opportunity. And the last several weeks have been opportunities for closure, and certainly the retirement celebration, but just numerous individual conversations with people internally and externally that, I started trying to take notes of it. So when I'm relaxing on a Thursday night, I'll be on my deck. I'll be able to look at that list of conversations I've had. I've learned from all of you and many of your predecessors around this board table. And it does take everybody. It takes leaders, it takes board members, it takes superintendents. And I'm grateful that we have made some gains. There's much more work to do. Marcy will do great work in continuing the legacy of District 287. And so thank you very much, board members. Again, it's just a privilege to have worked as the leader of this organization. So I appreciate it.
And now a few words to recognize Regina Neville at her last meeting. I have not had the privilege of serving alongside you quite as long as Michelle and Sandy have had, but you have been a constant in my entire time on this board, which I think is 5 years. And the leadership and commitment that I have seen in every single interaction that I've had with you around this district, and also what I know to be true for your work in Edina, is so deeply impressive. And there are 3 specific things that I wanted to recognize. The first, it has just been your fierce commitment to an advocacy for racial equity in this district that I feel like has been present from the very first time that I interacted with you. And we have done a lot of different things over the last 5 years. And the same is certainly true for Sandy. I feel like you two were a powerful team and really setting the tone for us as a board and as a district. But I think it's something that I have seen really drive you personally in ways that have been really meaningful as the leader of our board. And so wanted to appreciate you for that. The second thing is that you agreed to serve as chair for an additional year beyond what is sort of typical. And you did that to really steward us and our entire community through a superintendent search process. And that was a significant amount of time and work and effort. And I think we can't even fully imagine all that it actually was for you behind the scenes. But I think it's a signal of your care and how importantly you felt about really seeing all of us as a collective through that process. And then the last thing is just, you agreed to stay on for 6 more months to really support this transition in a way that I think is thoughtful and really models how to do that in a way that is responsible and caring. And I personally am so grateful and always a little bit intimidated by following in your shoes, but you've set such a great model for me and for others. And I'm grateful to that, to you for that. And again, I feel like everything you do is rooted in this care and commitment to our students and to our staff and to us as the group of people who are in this room on Thursday nights. And so with that, I just want to say I'm excited for your school board retirement, and that you also will reclaim these Thursday nights for something else that you are deeply passionate about. So thank you so much. And with that, as is tradition, we have your board member commitments book.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
You've given this to many people in the
I
past.
have.
Now this is for you.
I forgot it. Oh my, it is really beautiful. I'm gonna pass that around. Everybody needs to be able to see that. Yeah. You can just review that and pass it. It's beautiful. Everybody
It
should see that
is.
up close. But thank you. I appreciate your thoughtful words, and you summarized everything better than I could have thought of it. That it's everything. That, thank you. It's been a passion for sure. The richest learning opportunity of my career has been here. And that's in partnership with you, Sandy. I'm so grateful with all of the board members. When I started with the Edina School Board in 2010, it was, I learned a lot. I was passionate about education, knew Edina. But to join 287, I understood and appreciated board work at a whole new level. And it was like I'm working with the A team here. Best, and we have a great board in Edina. People come and go, but this is just such a committed group when you're serving on your local district boards and you come here. So thank you. And lead team, my gosh, it's what I shared for our finance team is true for every single department. And Juanine, there are no words. I could not have done this without you. I know when I started on this board, the number of times I needed to text you to say, I'm on the way and there's traffic. Because everything overlapped, all my committee assignments overlapped. There was always a Thursday Edina committee meeting, and then I would try to come up here, but it just beyond that. So at any rate, I'm grateful, I'm humbled, and you are all going to be amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we have cards for you both that we'll make sure you get once we're confident everybody has had a chance to sign them. There are some refreshments that we encourage people to hang out afterwards and just enjoy one another's company. And again, shout out to Juanine for making all of this happen as she does. And so with that, if there are any additional announcements or things folks would like to share, I'll pause for a minute. Francesca, go ahead.
All the awesome things that have to be said about two women who chose, they could have done other things. You could have been somewhere else Thursday. You didn't have to take on being here as many years as you did and doing things you did. It's really cool. And I was thinking of when I was in the car listening on CNN to some words that Hillary Rodham Clinton had to say about Madeleine Albright. Because she was like really petite, but did like super brave, amazing stuff and like went up against situations that you'd be surprised. She's like, we're going to go to this meeting and walk past some guards that were sent to like stop them. And I really love that you both got to hear this tonight and you still have other adventures ahead because I don't think people always get to hear awesome stuff about themselves. They kind of do the hard work and they hear the criticisms and you don't always get to hear the awesomeness. So I'm grateful that you each got to hear the awesomeness about yourselves now before future adventures. I hope every woman gets to. I don't think women often get to hear their appreciation. So I'm very happy for both of you for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but she said.
This is super cool.
Yeah, it really is.
You better not let this get dusty.
There's no dust in my house.
Thank you. Well, I got the impression there wouldn't be too much.
No, there's plenty. I'm here.
All right.
Without attention to detail.
With that, let's adjourn and move to our informal celebration. Is there a
It's
motion
a wrap.
to adjourn?
So moved.
So Regina Neville has the motion to adjourn the meeting, second by Ann Casey. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, and the meeting is adjourned at 8:13 p.m.
Wow.
Well done.
Well done, is right.
I mean, well.